The war in Ukraine has changed the world. And now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.
Доброго дня. Я Вячеслав Покотило від бізнес-школи МІМ Київ. Вітаю вас на проєкті Reinforce UA. Відразу хочу сказати, що цей проєкт англомовний, і для тих, хто приєднався до нас вперше і не говорить англійською, прошу натиснути кнопочку Interpretation внизу вашого екрану. Hello everybody, I'm Vyacheslav Pokotilo, and on behalf of the MIM Kyiv Business School, welcome you on Reinforce UA project. This project was designed in order to inspire Ukrainian business community in this difficult world, in these difficult times, and bring world-renowned intellectuals to share their opinion about the current ideas the humanity is discussing. The project became possible due to the generous support of Bogdan Havrilishin Family Foundation, 50 Thinkers Organization, and three major business education associations, AACVSB, AMBA, and EFMD. We are very grateful to everybody who donated on our website money when registering the project, and remind that all collected funds will be directed to support temporarily displaced Ukrainian women who would like to start their own businesses. Today's event will be recorded and will be available afterwards on various platforms. But those who participate online currently will be able to ask questions at the end of the presentation. For this purpose, I kindly ask you to use Q&A button rather than chat. And now I'm honored to welcome Dr. Professor Christian Schopper in our project. Professor Schopper advises clients on corporate finances, especially in German-speaking Europe and Central and Eastern European countries. Before setting up Corporate Finance Central Europe consulting boutique, he worked in major banks like Stanley Morgan, Merrill Lynch, UniCredit, and Raiffeisen. Besides holding a position in various board and advisory councils, he engaged in academics and management education as a visiting professor for corporate finance, capital market, and banking. But, and this is most interesting and currently will be the reason for having Professor Schopper with us today. He coaches artists and holds regular workshops and lectures with art management and art entrepreneurship. And now, today, he will share their views about artist business model and whether we can learn from artists in our business community. Professor Schopper, welcome you on the project and give you the floor.
Well, thank you very much. I hope this works here technically, because I'm not a techie really. Good. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with you tonight on this gig. I want to make this very short, this introduction. I want to thank very much Irina, your dean, that I was asked to hold a gig here tonight. Also, Oksana, very much for the organization of this event. When we came up some weeks ago with an idea of what to do here tonight against the background of the horror the Ukraine is currently going through, Irina and I had a lengthy conversation and then thought the topic tonight should not be something boring. Usually what I'm doing is like teaching banking, finance, capital markets, but to do something which is a little bit unusual, perhaps special. And so we came up with the topic of art. And we carved out some kind of subtopic, which is a crossover between the arts and business. And what I want to briefly talk about in the next sort of 35, 40 minutes is about the business model of artists, or some of them which can be observed. That's sort of the idea. And we'll afterwards then have some time also to do Q&A, but if there's some urgency, certainly I agreed with Oksana before, you can of course interrupt me. So I hope technicality are working here. I will try to make now the screen available. Let me see how this works again. Here we are. And I hope, can everybody see now the slides? I hope so. Does this work? Good, wonderful. Okay, topic is artist business models. Very quickly, what I'm doing usually, as I said, I'm teaching these days a lot of banking, finance, capital markets in various business schools. Most recently, I also wrote 2 crime fiction novels, which to some extent are experiences that I had in my life, some in course of some of the regions I've been working in, but also some transactions. But as I said, I also work from time to time with artists, with young artists. And among others, of course, you can imagine the art scene. Questions come up when you see a painting like this here. How much is this worth? And I was also interested in it. I say, well, how is the pricing of such a piece determined? And even more so when you look at artwork like this, which is half shredded. People will be familiar with this. This is a work by Banksy, which was shredded in the course of an auction and then sold actually for close to $2 million. And you were wondering, say, well, this is a half destroyed art of work. Why is it worth that much? And these were questions that I was focused on when I started to work with artists at the very beginning, how much you should ask for. And when you work with young artists at the very beginning, who do they do work for? Or where do they sell their work? Now, mostly it's friends and family who buy these works from young artists. It's like a fan club around you. But you know, you figure out as you try to sell more and more that not everybody is necessarily a fan of yours, but you want to get out to this market. You want to have your work to be seen by others, of course, to sell. And at the end of the day, to some extent, success of an artist is also selling art in the arts market. So the question is, how do you get out there? How do you broaden the audience for your products? And you will figure out fairly quickly you're not alone out there. There are other artists as well with different kind of art. So suddenly the question comes up, how do you position your art in the arts market? And you want to find these kind of green dots, which are those individuals, those prospective collectors of your art, and how to bridge the gap between where you're standing and where these people are. So how do you find these green dots? This is sort of the basic issue of any young artist when you try to approach the art market for the first time. Now, I can imagine when I came out of business school myself, I was saying you need a strategy, you need a plan, a pricing concept with all this kind of concept that we're working on. And you can imagine when someone coming from business school with an MBA has a discussion with an artist, this is naturally a culture clash. So, you know, you may say, well, this is useless to have a discussion with an artist like that. But the fact is like this, when you think about the life or lifespan of an artist who is a painter, you'll figure out this is a pretty long period of time. I mean, when you're a dancer at a ballet, like in Vienna here at the State Opera, well, probably your career is over when you're 35 or so. When you're a singer, it may be a bit longer, depending clearly, and then your kind of voice is shifting over time. But when you are, for example, writing books, or when you're making pictorial art, well, actually, your career may be many, many decades. So as a consequence, thinking about strategy in regards to your arts is not something you may dismiss easily. I make this fairly quickly and just want to focus here on the left side. Strategic positioning, just that you think, that you understand a little bit where we're coming from here. Imagine the following. You're sitting in Vienna, where I'm from, and you're somewhere in the pedestrian zone, and you're close to St. Stephen Cathedral, which is a big, big church in the center, the heart of Vienna. And sometimes you find artists there that make small little aquarelle paintings of St. Stephen Cathedral and sell this. Mostly to whom? Of course, tourists. Tourists coming from like Japan, United States, or somewhere else. Now, I can imagine this is some kind of art which isn't very risky. It is something which is easy to do, relatively easy to do. It's easy to sell because it's pleasing. It is something where I say, well, I mean, it may not have a big artistic value, but it's something certainly that sells. There's no doubt about it. So as an artist, you may want to reflect even, what you want to achieve here. Do you want to do something which is commercially quite likely successful, or do you really want to take a risk? And there's risk in two ways here. One is, of course, execution risk. You're trying something completely new. But at the same time, you're taking also risk regarding, is this ever going to sell? As you're taking market risk. And when you're kind of, to some extent, lucky, but also when you're diligent in regards to selling your art, you may, at the end of the day, be successful, not only commercially, but also creating a new, maybe epoch or a new style in regards to art. So I'm coming back to this kind of link between strategy and art. There may actually be a reason to think about this, despite the fact many artists are not actually thinking about this. But what I've been trying to do in holding artists, in holding seminars for many artists, is that you actually want to think about this as well as a positioning, as a question of how you want to place your art in the art market and how you incrementally can maybe then push some of these limits or borders that may so far exist in the market. Now, the business and art is something that may easily go or go together. Is someone like Andy Warhol already formulated this a while ago? Is a good business is actually the best art, and making money is nothing which is wrong. I want to start here getting into the whole question of business models and pricing with a Renaissance painter. Here's the painter, here's the artist, and following quotes are by him. He says, well, I should have actually stuck to all my engravings that I've been doing, because if I've done so and focused on this much more, I would be a much richer man today. He was known for his engravings, but also did other styles of art, particularly oil paintings, not many, but some of them. But actually, it was very clear, if he had focused much more engravings, that would have been commercially much more reasonable. And we'll slowly come there, because you may not know yet who it is, but it's like a quiz a little bit. At the end of the day, I will tell you who this artist is. He's an interesting character. This work was, for example, exhibited quite a while ago in Albertina in Vienna. It's actually from the Czech Republic in Prague, where it is most of the time, this painting in a museum. And even there are some letters linked to this where he's writing and say, well, it's a beautiful painting. You must imagine this is about 2 meters wide and about, I would say, 1.5 meters high. And I said, well, it took such a long time to do it. It's beautiful, but easily it could have earned about 200 ducats in the same time. What does this mean, 200 ducats? Well, we have here some positioning of his art that he did for various kind of market clusters. A ducat is about 1 florint, so it's about the same exchange rate. And he had some pricing clusters, this artist. One was the category you can't turn down kings. Actually, he made portraits of kings. Most of the time when he made something like this, it was a package. It was a drawing, a sketch, or some sketches, making an oil painting out of this, charged approximately 30 florins for this. a good oil painting, he would ask for about 10 florins. But I said, look, you know, not only it takes a long time to do it, but also it's expensive because, you know, the colors I use for this are expensive. For example, a good ounce of an ounce of good ultramarine would cost about 12 florins, quite a lot of course, he would use this up in the course of several paintings, but the grounding already of the colors would cost him about a florin, so on. So at the end of the day, when you look at it from a profit point of view, this wasn't necessarily very profitable to make, but he had to do it because kings is something you had to do, you had to paint. And if it was a good oil painting for one of his benefactors, well, you know, it's something where he could certainly enhance his reputation and therefore would definitely do this. But it was very clear if he could make prints and many more of these prints, despite the fact they were relatively cheaper, but you know, in regards to volume, he could slash out many, many more of them. And of course, there were many more individuals out there who would actually afford them to do. Now, the name of the individual is Mr. Albrecht Dürer. Dürer lived around 1500 in the area around Nuremberg. He was basically an art entrepreneur. He was independent. He went on business trips to visit benefactors or kings or royalty. He had actually really a marketing distribution concept when he came to a town, for example, because you can imagine back then there weren't museums. So when he had a single oil painting, it was then the piece of work exhibited in a church, for example. And weeks before he went to this location, he would already send off whole packs of prints in advance, which people could buy. So he did literally marketing for his work. Production, well, he had his own workshop. He even had a printing press, which was at that point of time a major investment to do. And very important with Albrecht Dürer, he was one of the first individuals, first artists to actually sign his work. The famous AD is something around this time that came up. And finally, he fiercely defended copyright. And actually one of the first copyright court cases, I don't want to go through in this detail here, was actually one in Venice and one in Nuremberg, where he successfully fought forgery. So art and business is not something new that was invented by Warhol. So it was already invented much earlier before, so about 500 years ago by Dürer. When we look at pricing and observation that regarding the arts market, then we can distinguish between two markets. One is the primary market, that is when an artist creates a new work of art and then sells it, most of the time through a gallery, to a collector. And then we have the secondary market. The secondary market mostly is auctions. Auctions on the one hand, Sotheby's Christie is clearly known, but at the same time, also sometimes galleries place then art in the secondary market as well. And one thing I was interested in is, you know, when we speak about pricing, also among others, in the secondary market, and I come to this and what the price drivers are. But interesting enough, for example, one of the elements in regards to pricing of a piece of art is who actually owned it before. And there is a quite famous and well-known incident that happened in the early 1970s when a piece by Robert Rauschenberg, which had in the 50s been acquired by the Skulls, was auctioned off. And Skull had previously in 58 bought this work, which you see on the right side, it's called Thor by Rauschenberg, for about $900. And in 73, this was auctioned off for about $85,000. And Rauschenberg saw that and suddenly says, well, how is this possible? You know, I've been working at all this, and you the collector, you make this profit. And the simple answer that Skull at that point of time gave was, well, actually, you know what? we've been working for each other in that regards, because ownership is involvement. It is something that basically adds value, when you're part of a collection, and therefore enhances the reputation and then also increases the price level for a certain artist. Now, this kind of feature, that the question of who owns art and that the art ownership by a certain collector or a certain museum is driving a price of a piece of art is something that we only see as of the 18th or 19th century, when art increasingly becomes some kind of positional good. And positional good basically means, it therefore defines a little bit who you are by owning this. Later on, also Veblen effect worked further on this. So basically, that it's not so important that you own a certain piece of art, but it's more important to say, well, actually, I can afford it. And when you look at the history of art pricing in the medieval times, for example, when you ordered a piece of art, it was like hiring a plumber or an electrician. It was about labor time, material costs. Nobody knows who did this kind of work. There was basically given a script, what should be in this painting, and then it was a matter of how long it took to create this work. It was only in the Renaissance time, Dürer was an example, as I said before, where the first time the signature comes up. So the first time we associate a name with a work. And it's only later on than in the 19th century that the appraisal of art is actually shifting away from a single individual work over to what kind of role a certain piece of art plays in the whole oeuvre of an artist. With the art critiques, by the way, also playing a very important role the first time. Before, like, art critique didn't play any role at all. And in that regards, I come back to that, what I said before is, when you look at a painting like that and say, well, how much is it? And I've taken this anecdote actually from a film where you see it in the top right corner. It's called The Price of Everything, where there's a dialogue between the filmmaker, the film director, Nathaniel Kahn, with the collector, the owner of this piece. And in this dialogue, the question comes up, well, when you buy this? Well, and the collector, Stefan Edlis, I come to this person in a second, says, well, I bought this in 97 for about 10 million. And the question was, well, how much is it worth today? And Stefan says, well, I believe it's about 100 million. I say, isn't this crazy? And then Nathaniel says, well, do you think it's worth it? It's worth it that someone pays about 100 million today for this piece of art. And Stefan then says, well, let's see. When you look at it, what this art is, well, it's put on a stretcher, which is built a frame, it's about $80, then we have some high quality canvas. We have, of course, the colors as such, which are kind of more expensive. But at the end of the day, that's really it when you look at the material costs. And then Stefan sort of concludes and says, well, there's a lot of people that know the price of everything and the value of nothing. So apply that for the reason what this is worth. But Stefan has some other kind of recommendations when you want to invest in the art and therefore participate in the price increase. Well, he says red is probably better than brown when you buy. Don't buy anything with fish. But at the end of the day, he says an effective collector is someone who deep down is or has to be pretty shallow. Now, Stefan is an interesting character because he was born in Vienna. He, by miracle, then survived the Holocaust here, came to the United States with nothing, and built up a plastics manufacturing plant in the United States. And he died about 2 years ago. And you can see the art that he collected mostly these days in Chicago, where also the one painting that I showed it before by Jasper Johns is there, called Target. You can find there in Chicago. One of the questions I asked myself when working with artists is also, why actually are there gallerists and galleries? And why is it not that artists are selling their work directly in the course of auctions? And there is actually a case study here, which is Paul Gauguin. It's quite interesting, who tried this. He actually tried to auction off his work twice. Each time before he went on his trips to Tahiti. But the first one was not a success, but the second one in 1895 was actually a full disaster. And just to give you some feeling, the one work that you see at the bottom right corner called Te Whare, kind of my home or the home, that was sold for about 180 French francs at the point of time. And just to give you a benchmark, Claude Monet was something similar work, like the ruined cathedral, that would have sold for about 13,000 French francs back then. By the way, in 2017, this work was auctioned off and achieved a price of about 25 million. So you may say, well, quite often these auctions, or at least in the case of Gauguin, that didn't work out well at all. So therefore, should an artist with new work use an auction? As in that case, didn't work. But there's another example, though. A artist you may be familiar with, Damon Hirst, and also his auction in September 2008 is pretty well known. He sold off within 2 days about 200 paintings for a total of more than 100 million pound sterlings, which at that point of time was making more money than all the artists in the National Gallery in London had earned in their whole lifetime. So it was an enormous kind of breakthrough, a very big success. However, having said this, when you look at the price chart of Damon Hirst art, and you see where the arrow is, which 2008 September, that actually his price levels have never really recovered, which to some extent may be the case because we're speaking 2008 and we're speaking just after the collapse of Lehman and the financial crisis. But de facto, many individuals were saying, well, actually, he sold off very well, but Damon Hirst actually had exploited the arts market. And when you had fallen prices then later on, basically many prospective collectors or buyers of his art were very skeptical, kind of investing in Damon Hirst. And at the end of the day, his prices, despite the fact this chart ends here in 2015, never really recovered that well. So at the end of the day, he had a one-off big success, but that was pretty much it. So the question is, what's the argument then going through galleries? Well, what you hear quite often is gallerists make their case to say, well, auctions is something which is unpredictable, it's volatile, it may actually destroy the reputation of an artist. It may actually even scare off potential buyers of your art to make further investments in your art later on. So therefore, they try to define some kind of pricing points along the career of an artist and therefore smooth a little bit the market. These were two anecdotes when speaking to gallerists and say, well, how do you actually price your art? When a young artist comes to you, and the first one says, well, I just make them up the prices. And I say, what happens then? Then I pray, okay. And the other gallerist came to me and, with an answer which wasn't quite dissimilar. Well, it basically says, I try to make sure that I can get away with it, with kind of the price level, which doesn't sound to be very sophisticated when you look at it. But at the end of the day, there is kind of a script, there are kind of reference values that galleries try to stick to when kind of positioning an art and artist in the arts market or collector markets. And there are a couple of price drivers here, which is the size of a work, technique, museums, so basically which collectors already have the art, age of an artist. Also, when you say, well, when you're older, you may have a longer career and therefore have had your shows, and your work may be positioned already with some collections or some museums, and therefore you know, you may deserve a kind of premium to what you asked previously. Interesting enough, there's an artist that made kind of a work of art around the pricing script, William Bohida. And when you look at it, and actually it may sound cynical, but to some extent there's a truth in it, pricing guide. How much should I ask for? Well, there's a base price when it's in the left side. The cost of material, the labor, how big it is, and so on. That's my base price. Well, but how much do you increase then? Well, when you had some kind of solo shows for each of them, make a multiplier. So if you had 3 solo shows times 3, number basically of relatively good art reviews. Well, if there are some of them, multiplier on top of this again, much more when there is one the times, for example, museum acquisition and so on. So it's actually true. I mean, this is really what galleries are doing. They are sort of along these data points try to establish pricing points. And on the right side, it comes a bit more cynical. What if, for example, Sarge acquires of them? Well, top up another 100,000. Or what if, you know, your work is shown at Basel or Fries Art Fair? Well, much more, and so on and so forth. By the way, I'll give you the slides then anyway, and you can look at this in more detail later on. But it shows you a little bit, it's kind of along which lines galleries are working here. Some pricing models are unique though. And there's, you see here 2 paintings, for example, by Degas. The left one is an oil. The right one is simply a sketch by some pastels. And when I would ask you right now, unfortunately I can't, and say, well, which one of the 2 do you think is more expensive? You would certainly say the left one, because oil usually is more expensive, more difficult to make, and so on and so forth. Actually, there's an anecdote by Degas, who one day when a collector from the United States came to studio and wanted to buy some art, Degas basically says, you know what? Each piece you see here in my studio, each costs 100,000. That's it, fixed price, regardless what the size is, regardless what the technique is, and so on. Okay, so I might say Degas didn't really care very much about pricing points. On the other hand, when you look at this Baroque painter, Salvator Rosa, not so well known, he, for example, would refuse advance payments. I'd say, well, you know, I don't even want to ask for something up front because I don't know yet how good this piece of work that I'm not doing for you will eventually become. And therefore, he, for example, priced his work very strictly according to quality. And quality is usually something, for instance, that a gallerist will always try to avoid to do. So therefore, rather stick to size or technique or the age or some other parameters similar like this. All right, if we rush this through a little bit further, let's look at some of the different artist business models which we can identify. Banksy, you probably know. Banksy, a street artist. What's insofar interesting about him, nobody knows who he is. We know his work, but we don't know who he is. We have some feeling he may work out of Bristol, but there's not much more that we know about him. Usually, when you go to his website, the official website, where actually art by Banksy can be bought officially, the Pest Control Office website. Usually, when looking at sales, you will find there's nothing available. So it's very, very hard to actually get Banksy work from the artist directly. There were some instances here. There are several I mentioned this slide, but for example, in 2013, when you were lucky and you were just walking into Central Park in New York, there was actually a pop-up stall there. And if you were lucky, you could buy there from Banksy directly, signed canvas for about $60. Nowadays, this is worth about $150,000 or more. because Banks is someone who says, look, I want to have my art to be seen. And mostly, of course, is known for the murals, which are sort of directly fixed on walls. And therefore, the value, the price is not something which for him is absolutely relevant. In the primary market, sometimes through the websites, there are prints available, posters, usually sort of in the 20 to 40,000 price range dollars, sometimes posters, but there's not much really available as far as material is concerned. You can buy his books, you can see his films. You actually, what you also could do is he has actually even a hotel in Bethlehem, where we'll also find some of his work, respectively, where sometimes some of his work actually is being sold off as well. I don't want to go into further aspects regarding Banksy. Here's another artist where I found his business model interesting, called Box. When you look at this, you may say, well, it looks like $100, but when you look closer, it say isn't quite, because it says $100, which does seem to be wrong. When I look at the top Federal Reserve, you see the S is wrong, and it's a, well, that's not $100, is it? Well, Box actually claims he has never really sold a piece of art. He would, for example, go to a restaurant, and when he's finished his meal, he would say to the waiter, well, I can pay, but actually, do you want to have this piece of art? And he would have, you know, this kind of $100 that you see here is something he made, something with pencil and some colors. And he would say, well, you know what, I'm not paying for this meal, but I exchanged this basically. And some waiters would say, yeah, okay, I'm fine with this. I accept this. And therefore he would say, well, I'm sold it actually, you know, I've just exchanged this, I've bartered this for a meal. What Box would do then, he would call up a couple of days later his collector fan base and say, you know, by the way, 3 days ago, I was in this bar, had some meal there. I paid actually with a piece of art. That's where you find it. And the interesting thing is then his collectors or the fan club would then actually hunt for this piece of work. And these today are, of course, worth a couple of $10,000. So it's a different kind of business model. It's not selling art, it's actually bartering art. Koons, Jeff Koons, you may know some of his work, like here in this photo. Jeff Koons sees art very differently. He says great artists of the future are going to be great negotiators. Jeff Koons is right now, today, the probably most expensive living artist that we have on this planet. He is literally a great negotiator. He also worked some time at an investment bank as a trader, and therefore knows a little bit, you know, how to go through negotiations, not only for his art, but he did this in the past also for commodities. And in the same documentary that I mentioned before, with Natalia Khan, actually there's a film shot in Jeff Koons' studio. And interesting enough, you know, you see a lot of people working there, and the question Natalia is asking Jeff Koons, saying, does it actually matter that you don't physically touch the canvas? Whereby Jeff Koons wouldn't be the first one doing so. When you think about Rembrandt, particular Rubens, they also had big workshops, particularly Rubens. He had like probably a good dozen of people working for him. And Koons says, well, you know, in a way, I'm physically doing it. And that mark, it is pointing to a certain mark on the canvas, is as if I would sit here and do it myself. So basically, for Jeff Koons, the important aspects of doing his art is the idea, negotiating it with the collector, but at the end of the day, the production process is not something that he gets too much involved in. Christo, as another example, you may know that Christo is usually doing art in kind of public spaces. See, the last one after his death was on the right top side. You see the hiding the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, but there's some other examples here as well. He, for example, is not only that he says, well, everything I do as an artist is basically useless, but the important thing is he says, look, this art is not to buy. It's actually for everyone. And these projects he's doing are relatively big and therefore you can imagine expensive. So how are they funded? Well, mostly it's funded by his sketches he's doing years in advance and selling this, and all this money that he's generating by this then goes into these projects and implementing them. So at the end of the day, the art that he's creating is for free. And did he become rich by this? Not necessarily, because he really invested all the funds into implementing these ideas, which was important to him. It's another sort of business model. A final thought is price and value, therefore, that we discussed before, a kind of a driver for the quality of art. A comment by Larry Poons. He says, there are no rules about what's going to be good and what's going to be bad. Art doesn't give a shit, it never has. And we come to an end, that's very it. So it took me about 40 minutes. I hope I gave you some ideas. And with this, I want to open the floor if there's any Q&A.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I was looking and thinking of possible some kind of similarities with traditional business model of the companies, and one with doing through the system is very much, to my understanding, similar to some of the legal companies. Kevin, right. You have a legal education, probably you can judge better than me. If I may start, my first question, because art for me, and you challenged this my perception, art is very, very different from the business. But there is a business around art. And I'd like to start with, you met and talked and have good relations with a lot of painters, artists. Why actually did they start painting? Was it for money, most of them, or was it for some ambitious, or was it just a need for doing something? What is behind this initial push? Because as far as business is concerned, is it separate, and a lot of people start for money. But I'm wondering if it's the same situation in other spheres, because not in all spheres money plays any roles. And you also gave a lot of examples of this.
That's quite interesting. As my personal observation, the answer is no. I mean, and therefore, even to introduce these concepts of art entrepreneurship to artists is a difficult exercise. And when you come up with, we know this from business in working with startups, for example, and I see actually really parallels between working with a young artist and working with a startup. Where say, well, the idea is 2%, but 98% is the other stuff. Is kind of the boring going out and marketing and fundraising and whatever is important. And of course, an artist, you may be lucky that one day a collector walks in by the door, but this is usually not happening. I mean, when this happens, it's never going to happen. And as I said, to have a dialogue with artists quite often on this kind of business aspect is even a difficult exercise to do. Nevertheless, that's something how I got into this topic in doing workshops for artists about this, to introduce them to the idea and say what is possible to be successful. But answering your question, no. I've not literally heard of anyone who says I do this for business, literally business purposes and or to become rich. No, very rarely. No.
Great.
I mean, Jeff Koons, as I said, is probably an exception here, but that's a very unusual approach, and I would say Jeff Koons is more like for me personally, more a businessman
it looks
artist. right?
It looks like. You calm me down, because I was a bit nervous about, starting painting for making money, because normally it shouldn't happen actually for normally ordinary person during the lifetime. And your famous example you mentioned, Gauguin, and actually it was not not a rich man at all, with all this painting being valued afterwards. Another question is important also in terms of Banksy, of the art and the painting is seen and some kind of materialized with an object. The object is painting, for example, the piece of art. And one of the particular peculiarity which differentiated, from example, from authors of the books, is this piece exists in one unique, normally. Dürer, I'm sure, also made another approach in one unique example. At the same time, the motivation, and correct me if I'm wrong, is not to value this example, but just to express something. Is a story behind the author, behind the artist himself. And actually, with all this kind of a piece, sorry for my long question, how to link, to create the value for the artist, and to as a mean of communication through evaluating of one particular piece of art. Because if you look at one particular piece of art, it values as in my opinion as something which you presented is not big unless you have behind the artist and the story behind this piece of art.
But that's a relatively new phenomenon, as I mentioned before. In the past, so when you look like 600-700 years back, art was like, as I said, you would go to an artist, and actually it wasn't an artist, it was literally a painter, and say, you make me now here a canvas, it's this size, 3 people on this, these colors I'd like to have. And it was like you would hire today an electrician in your home and say, make me some, connections here, and plugs and something like this. This was art 700 years ago, 800 years ago. When you look at the kind of 19th century, it was the first time that actually when these art critics also came in and looked at the whole oeuvre of an artist. I mean, you may say it was already earlier. Vasari, for example, was writing a lot about Renaissance painters. But when you looked not so much at the individual piece, but say, what's the role of this piece over the whole lifetime and work of an artist? And that's that has changed. And that's the reason why even today, when you look at the life of Picasso, an art critic would tell you, what kind of 10 important works there are that actually changed either his style, or where a certain life event was a major influence on his art, or where a certain period started, right? That has changed. That is so different. But regarding price, as I also mentioned before, it depends who you talk to. I mean, of course, once you have a piece of work in the secondary market, it's a matter of supply and demand, respectively, also a mix of money and art critique and scarcity and hype and momentum and things like this to create a price. When, for example, works are sold through the galleries, galleries try to avoid this kind of life story and quality by all time, because they say this is not something which I should judge as a gallerist. This is more something that an individual should then choose and pick what she or he thinks, I like, and therefore pay. But when you have, for example, 3 paintings with the same size, of the same periods done within the last 6 months next to each other. And even if all of us agree this one is actually the nicest one or the most impressive one, they will all cost the same. Okay, so gallerists would try to avoid to make this kind of differentiation here regarding this kind of feature of quality.
Okay,
which is interesting.
I will not be a gallerist, but coming back, is it really a big difference? You work for different banks, and there is typically a nice segment of banking related to wealthy people, super wealth. And in my opinion, the selling of pieces of art for several or hundreds of thousands of even dozens of thousands of euros, it is also some kind of serving this super rich population of the earth. If we see, and I checked what does the art market look like, the major segments are US, UK, and China. Yeah. Yeah. So it's not nothing surprise where the most rich people exist currently in the world. So from the business perspective, is it really a big difference of selling, some, I don't know what, fancy and big yacht for millionaire or a piece of art? Unique, expensive, prestige, demonstrate that you own something very particular. That's it.
Definitely. Definitely. And you must imagine the following. So first of all, the so-called arts market is these days about $70–80 billion a year, whereby this is the official figures. There's a much larger market behind this because a lot of these transactions are not happening via galleries or Sotheby's and Christie's, but actually happening in the private market, which is hidden, which is not transparent, what you see. I'd say you can invest in the art as long as you have an enormous imbalance and in the distribution of wealth. Is very simple. Particular of the last 2 decades that we come out here, where the top kind of 1% or 5% on this planet, owning property and assets, as long as they've been basically skyrocketing out. Any kind of investment in the art market is good because there is only a certain finite number of artworks around, and therefore this is a relatively a kind of simple equation that regards, because these individual pieces are piece by piece there, and there's only one of them available. And I mentioned before briefly Veblen effect. Many just buy a certain piece of art or an artist in order to show around vis-a-vis others that they can afford it. Because we know by these days how much a Picasso, a Rothko, or I don't know what is worth. We have a feeling for this, or a Richter. So, okay, wow, you can afford this for $60 million, or this Rothko for $80 million, or this, I don't know what else, a Modigliani, which these days you would not get below 100. Wow. This is why you see individuals, this ultra high net worth individuals, investing in the art. But the interesting thing is, one more comment, is art has become so expensive these days that even as a billionaire, and usually billionaires spend about 10% of their assets they own on the arts market, you can't actually buy a well-diversified arts portfolio any longer. It's not possible. I mean, for this, you can buy 3, 4, 5 good works of art, but that's it. And we all know for a well-diversified portfolio, you need like 15 pieces or so, when you do a stock portfolio or something like this. It's amazing. It's very interesting when you look at this, even from that point of view. Even billionaires have difficulties for investment purposes to establish a well-diversified art portfolio. It's just not possible any longer. It's become so expensive.
But then, well, if you budget, 10% of all your income to be put into art, it doesn't matter how many pieces are there. You anyway are not interested in looking and sitting on this. well, contrary to collectors, actually, which you also mentioned, but I'm not sure whether this, market of collectors, real big collectors, like 19th, beginning of 20th century, still exists and manages. Well, it's up to. Is it really a market for fine art, or how to call it, modern art collectors? Not galleries, but people who collect a lot.
Yeah. I mean, these days, the most dynamics and the most price increase in all this is contemporary art. There's no doubt about it. And it's so interesting to observe when you go back the last 20, 25 years in the auction house and say, well, where was most of the money made, most of the turnover? It's usually always the same names. It's the Picassos, it's the Matisse, it's the Warhols. It's always the same kind of brand names. That's what you see. But at the same time, art has become an asset category. And when you look at Geneva, the big warehouse there, the Freeport, some of these collectors fly in there once a year to look at their paintings, and then they go back to the cellar. That's it. They go back to the boxes, and they're stored there. So basically, the biggest museum in the world is actually not the Louvre or the Metropolitan Museum or something like this. No, it's a warehouse next to Geneva Airport.
Good to know. Next time I will be in Geneva, I'll try to visit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you can't get in there. But,
another question then. Modern technology allows actually to make exact copy of any piece of art, and I believe even to copy the type of painting, oil, canvases, and then styles, etc., etc. Not even optically, but physically. So what's then, if based on your previous remarks about that buyers don't want to buy the story, don't buy some kind of personality of the artist, but by the piece. What was the value then if you can make it, with 3D printer, you can easily make Rodin statues, in hundreds of thousands of copies everywhere.
Yeah, but I think it really is. I mean, that's the point. At the end of the day, what you buy here is certainly you don't buy the $80 stretcher, and you don't buy the $150 of paint which is on there, and maybe the canvas which is worth $30. But the $20 or $50 million you put on the table is because the story, because the uniqueness, because there's one of this one piece only available, and it's linked to the artist. That's why you pay for this. I think the more interesting question thus is, and we don't know really where this is going to go to, is the whole market of NFTs, for example, the non-fungible tokens, or when we suddenly would ask ourselves, why are people buying a video clip that everybody can look at for like $5 or $7 million these days? Why are people doing this? Because everybody can consume it, everybody can look at it, and there's just an individual that can say, well, but it belongs to me now, it's mine. Is it that why you would do it? It's an interesting question. We'll see. I mean, at the moment, the NFT market, as we see, isn't really working that well. There was a hype out there. But it's a little bit how it's maybe not fully answering your question regarding to replicating fully one for one, a work of art, but it's kind of how do you bring this out into the electronic space, in the inner space, in the cyberspace? How is art consumed there? What is it worth?
These are good questions, by the way. In metaverse, whether there will be paintings and art and NFT, and it comes back to collectors themselves, and collectibles, the market of collectibles is much, let's say, bigger than their fine art or painting market. I mean, you know, times bigger, and some kind of a collection of Pokemons cards, probably
look at cars.
sold by millions back and forth. But this is there's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of people involved, and NFT is actually also brings a massive, huge amount of people who want somehow to earn money from nothing, believing that these kind of things will grow and considering investment. But there are investment in everything, and it does mean that they will be paid back. But people are ready to put money in many funny things.
Yeah, I think
I don't believe this is an art.
Well, A, it's scarcity, B, uniqueness, 3, the story linked to this, and 4, you can impress others, because there's just one single unit of this, and I'm the one who has it.
Well, somehow to wrap up, you teach to executive in normal, let's say, business schools. And also you meet and consult and provide lectures and workshops for artists. What can you bring from artists to executives, to your classes with executives, and not speaking about the financial method and all those boring things, but what helps you to teach, let's say, standard, normal business executives, bankers, industrial companies, selling companies, etc., what can learn from artists and their communities?
I think it may sound a little bit superficial here, but many of them believe in that what they're doing. So it's about an honesty. It's about going your way, your path, even if you may not be successful at the end of the day, commercially successful, because I mentioned before, and we agree on this, many artists don't go into the arts because of making money, but because they believe in something. And this kind of honesty, going your way, believing in it, committing a lot of your energy and life and everything into that what you're doing, this kind of passion. These are probably the elements and qualitative elements, which is something that you may find also in a lot of startups, because startup is similar. If you have an idea today and well, you believe in this, you go for this. I mean, as a startup, it's 99.9% you're going to fail. It's a fact with new technology, new app, whatever, new invention. But these individuals believe in this, and I think this is where I see this link between how an artist ticks to some extent, but also, and that's I found so interesting, in working with entrepreneurs, with startups.
That's a great point. I wouldn't mix with startups, because there are different startups as well, like different artists. But this is a great point to start working not for money, to put all your passion and your enthusiasm and all your forces and power in order to reach something, and then probably you will be lucky enough to earn money, but obviously you will be lucky in the life. It's a good statement and good message to everybody in the world, and to business community leaders in particular. I gladly share this opinion, and with this would like to thank you very much for the time and really interesting insight. Not standard view on the market itself as an art market, but not standard view on these models and how the people approach to be successful very differently. And we can learn from this, from passion and from their attitude. Again, thank you very much for joining this program. project. For all participants, I remind you that you will be able to, for those who couldn't fight to join us today, you'll be able to see the video, the record, also with translation on different platforms, in particular on our site. And remind you that our next event will happen in 2 weeks on the 1st of March. And we'll be meeting Professor Maurice Ntombeni, the Dean of Gordon Institute for Business Study from Johannesburg, South Africa, and we'll be speaking about human resource management in crisis. Absolutely different subject, but this is exciting project to bring different ideas and finding common basis for it. We are living on the world and we are human beings making this world better. Professor Schopper, thank you very much again, and hopefully I will be able to welcome you one day in Kiev, in Ukraine, in a peaceful Ukraine. For everybody else, have a good evening, goodbye. Slava Ukraini, до зустрічі.
The war in Ukraine has changed the world, and now we need to think about where this world is moving to, together. That's why MIM Business School is launching the nationwide educational project Reinforce UA, where the world's greatest minds will share their ideas and insights. And you will get their experience, change your perspective, and discover what changes should the business be ready for, before and after the victory. Every week on reinforceua.com.